Hey, what's up? It's Jordan again. I would like to do a response video on this. Simon Whistler has given us 10 facts that the Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know, and I'm not going to normally do what I would consider to be apologetics videos or anything like that as a regular part of this channel, but I did think this one was kind of funny, mostly because the title is extremely inaccurate, I guess. It's not 10 facts that the Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know, because everything that he covers in this video is on the church's website. I mean, if they're trying to hide it, they're they're doing a pretty crappy job when they post the information on their website. So I think it's poorly titled, I should say. That's not a condemnation on the information or the facts that he's presenting. It's just funny that he's presenting it as facts that the church doesn't want its members to know when it's posted on the church's website that everyone has access to. So clearly they don't care if we know. But let's get this started and see what he has to say.
An article posted in the New York Times a few years ago sent shockwaves throughout the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as the Mormon Church. Hans Mattsson, a Swedish area authority equivalent to a cardinal overseeing the church's works in Europe, provided an interview expressing doubts about the church after learning of historical facts online that are never taught in Sunday school classes. Among the facts...
Okay, so this is one, I think, a funny argument to say, like, okay, we found an area authority that has questions and doubts about the church. So that has validity to it. Okay, but what if I find an area authority that doesn't have doubts and doesn't have questions? Would that not be equally valid? Right? If you're appealing to authority saying, hey, this is an area authority, you know, his doubts about the church should be considered more than, I don't know what else, a regular member. But then on the flip side, if I find an area authority of which most of them don't have doubts or questions about the church, wouldn't their opinion be just as valid as this area authority's? I mean, to me, it's a silly argument to say, oh, we found one person, one area authority that has doubts. So we're going to base our questioning of the church on this one person's doubts, when there's hundreds, thousands of other area authorities out there that don't have doubts. So that is, I mean, obviously, if it's just a pure numbers game, there's only, 15 million members of the church worldwide and 7 billion people on the planet. So yeah, most people don't believe, and most people have doubts and questions about the church. Like that. Good job. Good job. That's great argument there. If that's what you want to hang your hat on, then go for it. Like, obviously, I'm not going to convince you otherwise anyways, but I do think it's funny that this is what they base it on. Like, oh, goodness, we found someone who disagrees that used to be a member. Like, good for you, I guess. I don't know. To me, that doesn't hold a lot of weight. If the goal is to, I'm assuming based on the title, if the goal is to expose members of the church to these facts that allegedly the church doesn't want us to know about, then I would assume that the underlying goal is to expose members to these facts so that they can then themselves question the church and presumably leave, which, if that's the goal, I think they're falling quite short, because I'm unconvinced by any of this. I'll rewind it just a little bit, because this is something.
After learning of historical facts online that are never taught in Sunday school classes. Among the facts
So he found facts online that are never taught in Sunday school classes. No duh. Here's a question. What do you think the purpose of Sunday school is? and not just for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for any church, Christian church, Bible-based church, whatever. What is the purpose of Sunday school? Is it to discuss nonstop the arguments, whether they're good or bad, against what they're believing? I mean, let's think about this logically. The purpose of Sunday school is to teach people about the gospel. It's to read the scriptures, it's to go over the stories, it's to learn from Jesus Christ's example. Whatever each individual Sunday school wants to do, it has a specific purpose, and that purpose is not to discuss these issues. I mean, that's just kind of a silly point to make, that it's never discussed in Sunday school. Well, that's not the purpose of Sunday school, to talk about those things. And from, I get this to a point that from the outside looking in, you would think that, okay, I've got this damning evidence that the church is false, or whatever your claim is. So from your perspective, from the outside looking in, you're saying, I've got this evidence that proves the church is wrong. Why aren't they focused on it? Why don't they talk about it in their Sunday school? Why don't they focus on this to the point that they themselves become dispossessed and leave the church? And I get that mindset and the way that you'd think about that, but what you're not considering is how it comes from a member's point of view. I'm a member of the church, go to church every Sunday, go to Sunday school, and you know what I don't want to do in Sunday school is talk about this stuff. It's not interesting to me. And I get what you're saying, well, it should be interesting to you because it's condemning evidence or whatever. I get that, but the purpose of Sunday school is to learn about the gospel. That's the purpose of Sunday school. If I want to learn about this stuff, which I've done my fair share of research into all of these anti-Mormon facts, and that's fine. The information is out there. I've looked into it, and that's great. But to say that, oh, well, they don't talk about it in Sunday school, therefore they're hiding it, that's not true at all. That's not the purpose of Sunday school. It's not the purpose of church to go and learn about why your church is wrong. So that's not very debunking of them, or even to back up their title, that they don't want its members to know these facts. It's just funny to be accused of, or I'm speaking as if I'm the church. It's funny that they would accuse the church of trying to hide stuff from its members by not actively talking about it, when really no one within the church that I would say has a good, solid testimony cares. And again, I've kind of already covered why that doesn't matter to us as members, and why non-members, especially previous members who left the church because they're bitter about something, typically, why they think that we should care about it. But the simple fact of the matter is, we just don't. Just don't. Let's continue.
Joseph Smith's polygamous ways and some historical inconsistencies with the church's scriptures, such as the Book of Mormon. That a high-ranking official had not been aware of these facts throughout his church membership reveals the great lengths to which the Mormon church had gone to in hiding the many truths that paint the church in a bad light.
Okay, so when he says that a high-ranking member has gone this long without knowing of these things, I think that and I don't blame him personally, I don't blame Simon personally, but most people don't realize how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is structured, how it's organized. His position and area authority, that is still a lay ministry. He's doing it for free. It's a service-oriented calling. So he's not getting paid by the church, he's not getting funded by the church, and there's no, believe it or not, there's no academy. And let me clarify, the church owns a university, it's Brigham Young University. I'm attending BYU right now, but that is not something that is a prerequisite to obtaining any church calling. You do not have to go to BYU or any other kind of seminary or institute to learn about the religion. There's no formal education prerequisite to serving in a high-ranking position in the church. So when he says, "Oh, this guy's gone so long in the church," well, there's nothing about serving in the church in these leadership positions that would mandate you go through some kind of vast training on church history, on whatever this guy apparently didn't realize. Now, that's not to say that there is not an expectation of members who are called to these positions to obviously know church history and church doctrine, but there is no formal sit-down training and curriculum that you go through and cover all of this stuff. So to me, it would make perfect sense if what you're doing is focusing on the gospel and learning about the gospel and doing all of that stuff, that you would necessarily skip over a lot of these things that people outside the church think are so important. But it's just funny that it from his perspective, from the outside perspective, this seems to be such a huge sticking point of, well, he didn't know about it, therefore the church didn't teach him about it. But that doesn't make any sense because the information is out there. Give me just 1 second. I need to... Sorry, the nightlight came on. So, anyway, I should cut that out, but I'm not going to.
Video today, we're looking at 10 facts that the Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know. Number 10. Joseph Smith married girls as young as 14.
Alright, so he's going to go on, obviously, and explain this, but I would like to point something out. So this is mormonnewsroom.org. As you can see the church's logo right here, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you go to the main website, you just type in lds.org, and you go to the search bar and you type in polygamy, it pops up with a link to this website, the church's official newsroom website, and it's got this little blurb about polygamy, and then it says additional resources, and it has all of this information about polygamy in the church. It's there. They're not hiding it. The Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know about the polygamous relationships that Joseph Smith had, except here it is on the church's website. Everything. Now, I get that some people are, well, it hasn't always been there. Well, the internet hasn't always been there. This information has been available to the general church membership as long as the church has had these records. Obviously, it was a lot more inconvenient before the internet to go and do this research on your own. So it is no mystery to me that someone can go their entire life in the church, into whatever, their 50s, their 60s, without ever having learned about the details of polygamy or what Joseph Smith did. That's not weird at all for someone who's older, especially this gentleman, whoever, well, the picture's gone. He looked like he was old enough to remember the days before the internet. So that's not, in my mind, that's not a very good sticking point to say, oh yeah, so this person, he's a high-ranking member in the church, and he's been a member for 4 decades, and he didn't know about this stuff. The church is hiding it. No, they're not. He just didn't take the time to go and research it until later in his life, and then for whatever reason, his faith in the church, his testimony of the truth, was not quite as sure as he must have thought it was, because once you read about these things, he obviously had some pretty serious doubts. And, to each his own. If this is something that collapses his testimony, then whatever, that's on him. But the idea that they're trying to push that the church doesn't want its members to know is false. the information is out there currently, has always been accessible, not easily, but that's just the nature of history. Not all information has been easily accessible.
While the practice of polygamy in the church's early days is fairly common knowledge today, Mormon leaders and average members normally justify that by saying that it was once done to protect the widows at a time when male Mormon members were dying due to persecution. Yet a quick search of Joseph...
I would just like to point out, there are a lot of people, members of the church, that try to justify polygamy, and I think that's because they have an inherent discomfort with polygamy. I think, and that's normal, that's good, whatever. I don't really care if people are naturally inclined to think polygamy is weird, especially recently, given our culture and how we've, at least in the first world, gotten away from polygamy by and large. So it's not it's not weird that when you look back at church history that polygamy existed in context of religious history. I mean, polygamy existed in the Bible. Now, granted, I don't want to make this comparison, but polygamy exists in Islam. Polygamy existed in Judaism. I mean, polygamy is, a historical part of the human race, but it is also a religious fact that it has basically always been practiced. Now, just because you're uncomfortable with it and you try to justify it by saying, oh, well, a lot of the persecution led to the men being killed, and therefore the women needed to be protected and provided for by fewer and fewer men. Like, that's fine. You can make the justification if you want, but the simple fact of the matter is the point that I'd like to get across is that polygamy was reinstated by the order and direction of God. There's no justification needed. It's part of the restoration. It was foretold and prophesied of, and it happened. We as members of the church don't need to justify what God does and what he commands if we feel uncomfortable with it. Now, I'm going to leave that there, which I realize is going to probably leave some people wanting more, but this video is getting way too long. We're only a minute in, so...
genealogy at church-owned FamilySearch.org would prove that he was married to teenage girls. Documents further show that the youngest girl that Joseph Smith married was Helen Mar Kimball, who was 14 years old at the time of marriage. One would have to really stretch the truth to believe that these teenage girls were widows that needed to be taken care of. Number 9. Past prophets preached false doctrines. Joseph Smith has said that there are men living on the moon, describing them as over 6 feet tall and dressing like Quakers. Brigham Young even preached that there are people living on the sun. He also preached that Adam was God the Father and that black people are descendants of Cain and their skin color is a curse from God. Joseph Fielding Smith, another Mormon prophet, said in 1961 that no man will ever reach the moon. These and various other statements made by Mormon prophets have all been proven to be false over time.
So when he says very assertively that they preached these things that they said, what do you think that means, the word preach? Do you think that Simon is using that word accurately? It's going to take way too much time, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not super interested in it. Going into the details of these things that the past prophets have said, but I think that just from a surface level, I think that's something that you should really consider, is what does it mean to preach in a religious setting, considering these are, at least from members of the church, considered to be prophets. What does it mean for a prophet to preach? Does everything a prophet says constitute preaching? Or are there specific times and places in which the prophet or church leaders of any kind preach? Obviously, if if the pastor's up there giving a sermon, I think you could fairly say that he is preaching. Now, when he's at home, let's say just eating dinner with his family, and they're having a family discussion, does that constitute preaching? Is the pastor preaching every time he opens his mouth? Is the prophet preaching every time he opens his mouth? Well, no, obviously not. And what's funny is he's got the links, his sources, if you will, linked below in his description. If you feel so inclined, you can go and click on those links and try to find the sources that he's using to claim that these past prophets have preached these things that he said, that there's Quakers living on the moon, or that we're never going to get to the moon. I just think it's funny that people have a misconception about what a prophet is. I'd like to point out one contradiction real quick before we move on. So, if what you think a prophet is someone who can never be wrong, and this is going to get into two different aspects. One, the fact that these prophets obviously said a lot of stuff, and they were not always speaking or acting in the name of God with the authority of God. They're normal people. I mean, I get that from a perspective of non-understanding or misunderstanding, you would build this characterization of what a prophet is to be something other than just a normal person. But really, when it comes down to it, these are just normal people who have thoughts and opinions all their own. And that doesn't mean that all of their thoughts and opinions are correct. So the second point that I'd like to get to is, when you think about it, what you're trying to do is you're trying to say that if a prophet is ever wrong about anything, then obviously they're a false prophet. Whether they were prophesying at the time or preaching at the time, you are holding to that and saying, well, because they were wrong once about something, then they're false prophets. Let's do a simple example. Let's say I'm sitting in the room here with one of the current church leaders, with President Nelson, who I believe is a prophet, and I ask him, hey, what do you think the temperature is outside? And he says, oh, I don't know, maybe 28. And we walk outside with a thermometer and it happens to be 27. Is he a false prophet? Well, he was wrong. That is so absurd to think that a prophet has to be correct about everything. Because what you're doing as a non-believer who's trying to use this to justify your non-belief, if I can word it like that, what you're doing is you're trying to set up a level of infallibility with people, with humans. And what's funny about that is the Bible and the Book of Mormon are very clear that Jesus Christ was the only perfect person, the only one without sin. Everyone else is fallible. So no one of religious ilk, no one who's a member of the church, legitimately thinks that the prophet is incapable of being wrong. Because if he were incapable of being wrong, well, then he'd be perfect. But he can't be perfect because Jesus Christ was the only perfect person. So do you see the contradiction that the accusers are trying to set up by saying, well, the prophet was wrong once, therefore he's a false prophet, when in reality he can't, by definition, always be right, otherwise he would be perfect. Now, granted, that's just coming down to the totality of what is said by a prophet, because clearly, if a prophet is prophesying, or as he would say, preaching, and it is in a well-known venue for prophesying and preaching, and they get something wrong, then yeah, I think that's a valid criticism to make, that a prophet who is in the mode and method of preaching or prophesying gets something wrong, then yeah, I think that's questionable. Sure. But when someone attributes a comment to a past prophet, and they're just having a normal conversation, they're not preaching, they're not prophesying, they're not acting under the direction of God, they're just normal people living out their normal lives, and people ask questions about all sorts of weird things, especially if you consider that they are, from an outsider's perspective, they're allegedly a prophet. Clearly you're going to have a bunch of random people asking them all kinds of weird questions. Someone says, oh, do you think there's people living on the moon? And Joseph Smith's like, yeah, sure, and they probably look like Quakers. Like that in no way invalidates him as a prophet. But I should have pre-thought my comments before doing this so I could have made them more concise.
So how could one accept that these men are true prophets of God when just about everything they say is wrong?
Okay, real quick. Just about everything they say is wrong. So he listed off, I don't remember, he listed off 3 people, Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Joseph Fielding Smith, and then he listed, one thing each? So let's just quantify this. He gave us 3 past prophets and listed one example for each of them that amounted to 1 or 2 sentences, maybe a paragraph. Let's just get this into perspective. He's saying almost everything they've said is wrong. Okay, if you attribute 1 paragraph of speech to me throughout my life, and then you try to say, because I said something incorrect within that 1 paragraph, in which I never claimed to be acting or speaking under the direction of God or by the authority of God, and you're saying, well, in this 1 paragraph of speech that you gave us, you said something wrong, therefore almost everything that you've said is wrong. I think it's stupid. It's really stupid. So let's just consider that he is making the assertion that almost everything they've said is wrong, and he's only given us 3 examples from 3 different people. All right. Are you starting to see why this is unconvincing to a member to question the church? Anyway, let's go.
Number 8. Joseph Smith used peepstones to translate the Book of Mormon. The church has been deceiving members about the manner Smith translated the Book of Mormon. In paintings commonly seen in Mormon scripture,
the church has been deceiving people on the manner in which Joseph Smith had translated the plates. And then he references, here, let me move my thing. He references paintings. All right. So because an artist used artistic discretion to paint a representation of the translation, that means that the church is purposely deceiving people? That's a pretty weak argument, considering, I mean, I don't know. Feel free to fact check me on this, but I don't know of very many of these paintings that depict the translation happening like this. I don't know of very many of them, if any of them at all, were contracted by the church. If the artists were hired by the church to paint something. And if they, I mean, it does happen, it happens a lot. But my point is, I don't think that the church hired an artist and said, okay, I want you to paint the translation process, but I want you to paint it like this. They might have just called up an artist and said, hey, we'd like you to paint a painting of the translation, and this is what ended up happening. I don't know. It seems silly to suggest that the church was purposely putting out misleading paintings when, again, I'll reference what I said earlier. This information, the information about how Joseph Smith translated the plates with the seer stones, that information has been available since the beginning. It hasn't been easily accessible, but it has been available since the beginning. The church never hid it from anyone. And again, you could go most of your life in the church not knowing the details of this because it was never really discussed. And I personally don't see that as an issue, the church not going out of its way to discuss the details of the translation. But let's get to the next point.
And pamphlets, Smith is depicted translating from the gold plates as Oliver Cowdery transcribed his dictation. The truth is that the plates were not even used in the translation process. He merely used 2 peat stones that he placed in a hat. He would then bury his face in the hat and dictate whatever he purportedly saw there. The stones in a hat method is even acknowledged by current Mormon apostle Russell M. Nelson.
It's funny how he says it's even acknowledged. It's widely taught. Again, it is. I didn't pull up a tab for it. All of this stuff, if you go onto lds.org and you type in the search bar seer stones, you know what you're going to find? All of the information relevant to the seer stones, how they were used, where they were found, what Joseph Smith did with them. It's not being hid from you. It is actively taught.
In an obscure 1992 talk for mission presidents that can actually still be found in the church's official website. It is also worth noting that these are the same stones he found while digging a well for Mason Chase and the same stones he used for treasure hunting. So while he may have been a fraud, at least he believed in the power of recycling. Number 7. Temple rituals were copied from the Freemasons. Joseph Smith became a Freemason in March of 1842. In May of 1842, he introduced what is now known as the Temple Endowment Session.
All right, so one thing I'd like to point out, I'm not going to try to go into this, I'll just let it play. You can think what you want. But as he just pointed out, so he joined the Freemasons in March, and then in May, we got the Temple Endowment. So his supposed point is that within that time frame, Joseph Smith joining the Masons and getting literally to the top, or at least high enough within the Masons that he's able to get these secret ritualistic processes. I mean, I don't know that much about the Freemasons, but I don't think that in a few months after joining, they're going to share all their secrets with you. I could be wrong, who knows? Maybe you join up and they're just right from the get-go, your 42nd degree or whatever, or 32nd degree. I don't know anything about the Masons, but I think it's logical enough to assume that a few months isn't enough time to join a well-known secret group of people and have access to all of their most secret, closely held rituals. I don't know. To me, that's funny. But let's see what he says.
The Temple Endowment Session is among the most secretive rituals in the Mormon Church. Unlike other rituals such as baptisms or the administration of the sacrament, bread and water, members are not allowed to discuss the endowment in public. During an actual session, members perform rituals involving secret handshakes and passwords, all necessary to be allowed entry into the celestial kingdom where God, the Father and Son live. What they don't know is that these rituals were heavily borrowed from the Freemasonry, almost word for word. The few members who know about the Masonry connection would defend it by saying that the Freemasons in turn copied their ritual from King Solomon's Temple. Yet even the church's most prominent apologetic site, Fair LDS, would refute that, admitting that what went on in Solomon's Temple had absolutely nothing in common with the Masonic rituals or the Mormon's endowment session. Number 6. The Kinderhook plates was a hoax. The Kinderhook plates are 6 brass plates that allegedly contained ancient characters. These
I'm going to let this play through. I don't have a whole lot, so I'll be perfectly honest. I had never heard of the Kinderhook plates until I saw this video just a few hours ago. And so if you want to say, oh, look, the church is hiding it because they didn't teach you about it, whatever. I don't care, and I'm not that interested. But I'll point out, because I went to LDS.org and searched Kinderhook plates, and you know what came up? Weird. This article about the Kinderhook plates. Now let's contrast that with the title here. You see what that says? The Mormon Church doesn't want its members to know. Okay, so they don't want us to know, but right here, let's see if we can't zoom in right here. Do you see that right there? 1981. I don't know when the Kinderhook plates were introduced. It was a while ago because it was during Joseph Smith's time, but obviously this has been around. This is before the internet, or before the common use of the internet. This has been accessible information. You know, no one in the church is hiding what's happening. No, or they're not hiding this specifically, I guess I'll say. So yeah, anyway, just wanted to point out that it's not something that they don't want you to know because, well, it's right there on the church's website.
plates were found by locals in Kinderhook, Illinois, along with a skeleton. Smith, believing them to be genuine ancient artifacts, later translated a
So this is, I thought I was going to let it play all the way through, but I'd like to point out. So he just said Smith believed them to be real artifacts. Again, if you'd like to go to his video, I'll put a link to his video in the description of mine. And go ahead and just click on all of them, because you're going to have to eventually to find the source for him saying that Joseph thought they were real, valid. I just, that's an odd claim to make when there's no evidence backing that claim up.
Plate's writings, claiming that it tells the story of the skeleton back when he was less skeletal and far more alive. According to Smith, he was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh. In 1980, however, scientists examined the plates and determined that they were not ancient at all. They were eventually proven to be nothing more than a simple hoax. After this discovery, Mormon apologists tried to put a spin on it by saying that Smith never actually tried to translate it. Yet, in pages 372 to 379 of the Mormon's History of the Church book, Smith did confirm that he translated the plates, discussing the details of the translation in the aforementioned pages.
So on this, the one that he even put a little screenshot up of, it talks about that very thing, about the claim that Joseph Smith translated these. As you can see, it's fairly long. You can go ahead and read it if you want, but from the perspective of a member of the church, I listened to what he said, came here, read this, and I get that you're saying, well, you're going to trust the article that the church puts out. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess I am by default very trusting of the church, and that's going to bother a lot of people who are not members of the church because you think I should be more skeptical of it, but I assure you I am plenty skeptical. I just don't care enough about things that I find insignificant. So.
Number 5. There are multiple accounts of the first vision. There is no middle ground. Joseph Smith talked with the Father and the Son, or he didn't. If he didn't, then we are embraced in a great fraud. A terrible fraud. That's a quote from Gordon B. Hinckley. The first vision, as known today in Mormon record...
I would like to point out that I was alive when President Gordon B. Hinckley said that, and I don't vividly remember him saying it or anything, but I just think it's funny that that is the quote that he's using, because it's far and away out of context. Now, granted, there's not a whole lot of context that necessarily changes the meaning, but anyone that reads the actual talk that President Hinckley gave, in which he pulled that excerpt from, you'll understand what he's doing and what he's saying. And he's basically telling the truth that either the church is true or it's not. That's essentially what he's saying. And obviously that hinges on the validity of the Book of Mormon and the translation of it by Joseph Smith. Now, I'll just cover it right now and then let this segment play through. So, he's saying that there's multiple accounts of the first vision. Again, this is something that you're just going to have to do on your own. I've looked into this a little bit, enough for me to feel comfortable with it. How well do you remember particular events? Now, he's going to go on to say, oh, because it's such a spiritual event, you'd think he would remember everything. Okay, sure, fair enough. That would maybe be a valid argument to someone that doesn't understand anything about the way the human mind works in regards to memory and recollection. So you go ahead if you want to be ignorant and continue and use that as your foundation for, oh, there's multiple accounts of the first vision, therefore the church is wrong. Okay, go ahead. That's fine. I don't care if you believe or you don't believe. I just think it's funny when what I would consider to be very weak arguments are put forward against the church. And to be honest, that's the only reason why I'm doing a response video on this particular video versus the many others that exist, because this I would consider to be very low-hanging fruit. These are very poor arguments against the church. But do just a little bit of research, just a little bit, into how the human mind works in regards to memory and recollection, because his point, like, oh, well, it's such a spiritual experience, shouldn't you remember everything? Well, apply that logic to something else. Someone that experiences a traumatic event. Oh, well, it's so traumatic, shouldn't you remember everything? Or maybe a super good event, like, I don't know, your wedding day, or the day that your first child is born, or any of your children are born, or whatever. Like, oh, it was such a great event, like, shouldn't you remember every detail? It doesn't hold up to the scrutiny of how memories work, of how we remember things. And if you specifically look up the versions of the first vision that Joseph Smith gives, and you look up the history behind them, when they were given, who they were given to, like, a lot of this seems a lot less condemning of the multiple accounts, because he just says, oh, there's multiple accounts, and he never gives any details about which what details are missing from one, or what details are added in another, or how they're incongruent. He just says, oh, there's different accounts. Okay, I mean, if I'm telling a story and I use the adjective big to describe something, but then another time when I tell the same story, instead of saying big, I say large. Oh, well, it's a different account. I said something different. And how much does that matter? You can decide for yourself if you think that matters, but I don't think it does.
Of the literal appearance of God as both the Father and the Son to Joseph Smith in the spring of 1820. Today it holds an important place in the Mormon Church's official history, yet this event wasn't actually taught in the church until 1842, 22 years after it was supposed to have happened.
What? So the first vision wasn't officially taught until 1842. Again, I don't really know what that means, and I can't seem to find a source for that claim that it wasn't officially taught. And like, what does that mean to have it be officially taught? It's the history of the beginning of the church, the foundation of the church. It's not as obscure as what he might want it to be. Okay, the idea that Joseph Smith, having the first vision, seeing God the Father and Jesus Christ, trying to say that wasn't known within the church or on the outside of the church until 1842. What on earth was the persecution for then? I mean, since the vision happened in 1820, when Joseph Smith first started telling people, right? So from 1820, when he started telling people, it was known. So it wasn't officially taught. I'm not sure exactly what he thinks officially taught means, because I think it's a silly claim to make that the people at the time, so the church was formed in 1830, the people in 1830, he's trying to say, didn't know about the first vision. They didn't know that Joseph Smith's claim to fame was that he had seen God the Father and Jesus Christ. They had no idea about the first vision. Like, that is the most absurd thing to claim. Obviously, people knew that is what happened, because that's what separates the Mormons at the time from everyone else. The fact that Joseph Smith is claiming that he saw God. No one else was claiming that. I mean, no other prominent figures. Obviously, there's people all the time that claim they see God. And so this idea that it wasn't officially taught until 1842, I know what he's getting at, but it's not worth getting into. I'm just trying to point out that the idea that people at the time in the 1820s, 1830s, and beyond, that those people had no idea, or I guess from 1942 and before, that those people had no idea about the first vision or Joseph's claim that he'd seen God and Jesus Christ, I think that's absurd. I don't know what he's basing that assertion on.
Records also show that there are 9 versions of the account. Among the inconsistencies seen when compared side by side include Smith's age at the time it happened, the place where he received the vision, the personage he saw, and the instructions he received. One would think that remembering the details of such a remarkable experience would not have been that hard, but the inconsistencies of the multiple first vision accounts and the fact that it was not even mentioned in the church's early years cast doubts upon the validity of Smith's.
Not mentioned? How is it not mentioned? That was one of the first things that he mentioned when he had the vision as a 14-year-old boy, when all of the, maybe not all of them, but the other religious leaders, all of the congregations that existed at the time in Palmyra, New York, obviously their goal is to save people, or in other words, to get people to join their church. They're, saying, hey, Joseph, why don't you come join our church? And then Joseph says, well, because I saw God, and he said that I shouldn't join any of your churches. I mean, that's the historical account of what happened. Joseph has the first vision, and then he starts telling people that he saw God before the church was formed. But yet, he's trying to claim that people didn't know this? I don't know. That's absurd.
Claims. Number 4. Church leaders were deceived by Mark Hoffman. One of the most embarrassing episodes in recent church history is that involving convicted murderer and counterfeiter Mark Hoffman. Hoffman sold what he asserted to be official church documents that he found. Among them included what he claimed was the original anthem transcript, a piece of paper containing characters that Joseph Smith copied from the gold plates, an 1825 Joseph Smith holograph detailing Smith's exploits as a treasure hunter and practitioner of black magic, and the infamous salamander letter, supposedly a letter written by Martin Harris claiming that it was a white salamander and not an angel that appeared to Joseph Smith in 1823. Church leaders such as eventual prophet Gordon B. Hinckley and current apostle Dallin H. Oakes were tricked into believing those were genuine, shelling out thousands of dollars to purchase them and even defending the contents of the documents in pulpit talks. Of course, it would be proven later, when Hoffman was convicted of murder, that these documents were nothing more than forgeries created by Hoffman to make a fool out of the church leaders and earn a profit in the process. Number 3.
So, just once again, 1987, October 1987, fraudulent documents from forger Mark Hoffman noted. This is on the website. Perhaps you could say that, facts that the church doesn't want its members to know. Maybe your claim is that this article doesn't contain all the facts or whatever. I don't know. But it is on the website, so I don't know how he can say that the church doesn't want its members to know when it's on the website.
The facts surrounding the death of Joseph Smith. Mormon church members sing hymns portraying Joseph Smith as a martyr who died for his faith. It is never taught in classes that he was actually imprisoned for destroying a newspaper printing press as retaliation for negative press about him. While in prison, he removed his garments, the Mormon magic underwear, and instructed the others in the jail with him to do the same. Mormons are also not aware that he had a gun and killed 2 people shortly before he was shot to death. He also made the Masonic symbol for distress as a last-ditch effort to save his life. Certainly not the lamb to the slaughter that the Mormons like to describe his death as. Number 2. The Book of Abraham has been proven to be false by Egyptologists. In 1835, Joseph Smith purchased a scroll containing Egyptian hieroglyphs from a traveling showman named Michael Chandler. He then proceeded to examine the scroll, claiming that it contained writings of Abraham, and he translated it into now what is known as the Book of Abraham. In 1966, several fragments of the original scroll that Smith used resurfaced. With the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, Egyptology had advanced profoundly by this time, and Egyptologists were able to validate whether Smith's translation of the scroll was accurate. Turns out the scroll was merely a common Egyptian funerary text that had absolutely nothing to do with Abraham. As with the Kinderhook plates, this put into question Smith's credibility as a divinely aided translator. Egyptologist Dr. James H. Brierstead of the University of Chicago said, Joseph Smith's interpretation of them as part of a unique revelation through Abraham, therefore, very clearly demonstrates that he was totally unacquainted with the significance of these documents and absolutely ignorant of the simplest facts of Egyptian writing and civilization. Number 1. Evidence against the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is often called the keystone of the Mormon religion. The validity of the church's claim as the one true church and Joseph Smith as the chosen prophet of God hinges upon whether the book is really an ancient record translated by the power of God or not. The problem is that the book has failed under scrutiny on many, many levels. It has been...
So you're going to have to click through these links on your own and figure out what levels of scrutiny those are. I did not click through the links. I have looked up a lot in the past about what the supposed errors are, and I think it's funny, this isn't even, so this came out, he published this December 7th, so whatever, a week ago. There has been, I guess my opinion is biased. Obviously, I'm operating under a certain level of confirmation bias, and I'll admit that openly. But when you do this research on your own, like if you go and look, whatever, you try to look it up, what are the problems with the Book of Mormon? And then you read that, you try to understand it. I think you'll see that these criticisms of the book have many, many flaws in and of themselves. Like, the criticisms are invalid. But obviously, if you're prone to not believing in the church or in religion or whatever, then they're going to sound quite plausible to you, and that's good for you, whatever.
Well documented that the Book of Mormon contains various anachronisms. Heavy plagiarism from the King James Bible is also apparent, including translation errors.
So, the accusation that there's plagiarism from the Bible in the Book of Mormon, that's contextually inaccurate, and anyone who's read the Book of Mormon would know that. And I'm not saying anyone who's a member of the church, I'm saying anyone who's read the Book of Mormon knows that that is a stupid claim to make, that it's plagiarizing the Bible. And I'm not going to explain why. I'm just going to say that maybe you should get a copy of the Book of Mormon and you should read it and determine for yourself if you think that it's plagiarized, if it's a I don't know what to say, because the idea that the Book of Mormon is plagiarizing from the Bible, it has a negative connotation behind it to say it's been plagiarized. And all I'm trying to say is that if you read the Book of Mormon and you see the excerpts, if you will, the plagiarizing sections from the Bible, you'll understand why they're there, and it's not plagiarism. So, it's quoting. You know, if you quote something in a scholarly paper or any paper for school or whatever, if you quote someone and then you source where you got the quote, that's not plagiarism, that's quoting. But anyway.
Up to this day, the geographical location of the events of the book has not been located, and no supporting archaeological evidence has ever been discovered. Perhaps the most damning evidence against the book is the fact that DNA testing disproved its claim that a Jewish family who left Jerusalem in 600 BC to settle in the New World are the principal ancestors of the American Indians. With that, there simply is only one logical conclusion that could be made about the Book of Mormon, that it is, in fact, a 19th century fiction manufactured by Joseph Smith. Therefore, this makes all the other claims, along with this entire religion, just a fabrication. So I really hope you found that video interesting.
So, I'll close it off here. I would like to make one point. I think that he summed it up pretty well. If you think that the Book of Mormon is a hoax, then obviously the church isn't true. Good for you. Go about your life. I don't really care. If you are at least somewhat interested or remotely interested, the claim that the Book of Mormon is a fraud, or that it's a hoax and Joseph Smith is a fraud, what you need to understand, the quote that he pulled earlier from President Hinckley, where he was basically saying either we are all, and at the time he was president of the church and he's giving this talk in general conference, and he's saying there's really only two options. There's no gray area. We're either completely deceived, and he's talking about the membership of the church, including himself. He's saying that we are all collectively completely deceived by what I think a lot of people consider the greatest hoax of the modern era. I mean, especially now, considering how much the church has grown. I mean, if it stayed as just a small local church where it was, and whatever, it has a few thousand members, like no big deal, but the membership now is over 15 million worldwide. So due to the reach and impact that the church has had, I think in many ways you could consider it to be the biggest, grandest hoax and fraud of all time. And so considering the remarks from President Hinckley that these are the options, we are either completely deceived or it's true, what you need to realize is that what you're admitting to, and this isn't trying to sway you in any way, I just think it's an underlying assumption that most people don't realize that they're making. But when you say that the Book of Mormon isn't true, and you acknowledge that it has resulted in the biggest hoax of all time, then, well, I guess you could make two underlying assumptions. The one that I think most people don't realize that they're making is that you're admitting Joseph Smith is a genius. I mean, granted, I'll just quickly identify the other underlying assumption that you could make is that every member of the church is just a complete idiot. And if that's what you want to believe, that's fine. That's fine with me. But the idea that there are so many members of the church and that it is still growing, and these, whatever he's trying to point out, the scrutiny that the Book of Mormon has been put under and fallen short, I think that from a purely secular researching of the book, especially lately, let's say within the last 5 or 10 years, when it comes to archaeological evidence or anthropological evidence in favor of the Book of Mormon, in favor of the text within the Book of Mormon, what the claims are, what is being said, the historical events, the references to Jerusalem, all of that stuff, it is overwhelmingly accurate. And so whatever scrutiny he thinks he's found that the Book of Mormon has fallen short on, I think I can't make the claim because I don't know exactly what sources he used. I mean, I have the sources that he's linked in the video, but those are insufficient. I've looked up a lot of the supposed arguments against the Book of Mormon, a lot of the, like they got this wrong, or the anacronyms that he brought up. I have this website, the anachronisms of the Book of Mormon. Like I've looked at all of this, and it's, like I say, from the perspective of a faithful member who has a testimony in the Church of Jesus Christ and of Joseph Smith, it's unconvincing, and hopefully that gives a little bit of encouragement to the people who are on the fence. Like if you're a member of the church and you watch this and you're struggling, like, oh, I had no idea, all you can do is continue learning and pray about it. I've done what I feel is a sufficient amount of research into these criticisms to feel confident in my own conviction of the truth based on what I would consider to be the horrible inaccuracies with the criticisms of the church. But anyway, this video is way too long, so that is all I've got. Like I say, I don't plan on doing response or rebuttal videos in this sort of apologetics mode and method. I'm actually planning on doing more response videos to videos that are put out by the church and giving some of my own thoughts and opinions on what is being presented to us, what the church is teaching, stuff like that. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully it was informative. It wasn't necessarily designed to be too informative, but I did want to just point out a lot of the problems that were presented in this video. So anyway, I'll see you later.